Hey you guys, it's me, it's Daniel Waddington here with another news flash. And yes, this is the day when I was supposed to be going to the Play Expo in Manchester, and because it was going to take quite some time to get there, and because I got cold last time, well, I really apologise, but I could have got there on the bus, but it was going to be too much hassle, so I ended up staying in today. And that means I can tell you about my new movie, because my new movie is going to be the movie that they cannot make. It would be impossible to make this movie because it would be a niche market all about the Amiga. So before we take a look at that, here we are. This is my flat. We may as well take a look around and see what we can see. I'm just going to turn the camera over. And well, it's a junk fest. I have got a lamp on the table. That's my sofa. That's my heating source. The lamp. And we've also got some DVDs. Some more DVDs, some of which I made myself. And some singles, albums, some games. And the controller. There's a cigarette pack collection, the Millennium Falcon, a massive big TV, and a work in progress Xbox 360. And over on the other side we have some more artwork, festivals that I recorded, and some more great books which you've probably seen already, and the Amiga magazines, and some guides there, the disc expander and the Techno Sound Turbo 2 sound sampling cartridge. Amazing! And some more books, and some more Amiga stuff, and some more albums, and more books, and more Amiga stuff. And over here we have the main desk, where we have on one side 2 joysticks plugged into the Amiga, thanks to this Canadian device which I bought, Miracle connectors, and now we can connect those in. You may notice that we are using an Amiga case there, and yes, there were a couple of turbo leads and turbo things that came out of there to do with the cooler, but I got rid of those. And here is my second monitor which I use for the script. That's the actual one of the films on, you can see at the moment. And if we try to highlight that script, it will appear, and yes, it's quite a long script. That's the one I'm working for, and it's maybe 35-40 pages in length. So there we go, and that's that. So yes, this is an Amiga of sorts, even though it has a PC inside there. We just lift off that case. We have a PC Mini ITX motherboard with a cooler, and we also have the world's worst graphics card, which is at least 10 years old. But what that means is that those things will fit inside a PC motherboard case, and if I can only just get it back together, then that's it. We have a spare fan to keeping that nice and cool. We have some fans which we can use, the world's worst mouse which needs updating, and we have the microphone, which is a stereo microphone and is the one I've used for quite some time, with a spare controller. So that is more or less my setup, except for, you may notice, I'm actually charging my phone up. My phone has got the workbench manual on there, and I'm using these, which are Commodore 64 power switches, which really help this setup. And a DVD which isn't working, my 2 hard drives, and a spare, and that's probably about it, except for this remote control, which turns on this light over here, or at least it should do. There you go, and that's the light which I use, which turns all of the rest multicolours. So that's an extractor. So this is our setup, and this is what I use to edit my stuff. No arms length, somewhere like that. So it takes quite some time to edit this stuff, and there we go, a picture. So a picture, and yes, some of this stuff you've probably seen a million times before. We're talking about the Amiga. Whoopee! Even confidential files there. So yes, this documentary will be about the Amiga and stuff about the Amiga. So here we are, and this is the introduction to the film, which will be released in December, hopefully, which is the film I'm making. Now this is the film, as I say, which cannot be made because of a lot of reasons. Sometimes it's the length of time it would take to create something like this. Sometimes it's the time and the trouble, the team, the money. Sometimes it's the copyright involved. Sometimes legal issues and things like that. Whole project like this back for years. Luckily this is just a YouTube video, so hopefully, because I'm doing this for YouTube, then hopefully we can segue past those copyright issues. And I've used tens of thousands of images in this documentary. Tens of thousands would take tens of years to get clearance for this kind of thing. So I haven't chosen images at random. I've actually taken my time to try to find the perfect image for whatever I'm explaining. Now this documentary is not going to be the history video games guide to the planet. Otherwise it would look completely different. This is going to be somewhat more of a technical guide to the history of computers and the history of Silicon Valley, all the way from the beginning with the simple adding machines all the way through to the dawn of the Amiga in this first part of the 5 films that I'm hoping to make. And the great news is that a few days ago I locked down the narration of the first 4 films in order. So now I've narrated the whole thing, I've scored it with music, and all I have to do is to find the content to fill in the visuals. And most of that is images, because yes, I could have chosen commercials, adverts, things which have appeared on TV, and that would have made my life a lot easier to do it like that. And other YouTubers do that. It saves a lot of time and effort, and you can just stick a few adverts on the screen. And yes, I have downloaded hundreds of ads that I found on YouTube, from everything from the Vectrex to the TRS-80 to the IBM PC, and I made sure 95% of those were left off the table. I worked with the From Bedrooms to Billions Amiga years guys. I said, when we were talking about copyright and things like that, is it better to find your own material to express your own voice, or is it better to just buy someone else's documentary or advertisement or something like that, a commercial, a featurette? Is it, you know, would you rather use other people's stuff to tell your story when you could actually go out there and get your own interviews and your own things, you know? So that's my argument. Why should I use copyright material, even though I could do for YouTube? I try to avoid it as best I can, and there are some things which I cannot avoid. I've used the Atari Museum extensively, and those things are watermarked, but everything else which is copyright, I've either turned the image black and white, or I've flipped that over, or I've zoomed in on just a part of that to try and maintain the original copyright, and if you zoom in on something and pan across that, that original copyright for the whole thing is kept, hopefully. So even though I have used material, hopefully I haven't ripped that off, and that was a big concern of mine, even though it's just for YouTube. I could have used other people's material and finished this months ago, but I actually went to the time and the trouble of choosing every single image, not just the first one I could find, but loads. Out of the loads, I found maybe 1 or 2 images which I could use, and then it was the hunt for the rest to try and fill in the gaps. So, as I say, it's the film which cannot be made. It's a 4-hour film talking about the more technical side of computers. So it will involve the specs of the computers, what the computers look like, the advertisements, what it looks like inside. Let's look at the chips, let's have a look at the design specs, let's have a look at the blueprints, the guys that made it, the building in which it was made. You know, if it was Commodore, let's see the building, let's see the heads of Commodore, the heads of Atari, the heads of IBM, and what are they going through, the ups and downs of buying and selling and the piracy on the high seas of the 1980s video games commercial market. And of course it takes some kind of pioneer to do that, and we'll be taking a look at Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and things like that, but not really focusing on those guys. But I wanted a history guide where I found out what came first, the Atari or the Apple, what came first, the Intellivision or the ColecoVision, what came first, the Atari or the Amiga, the ST or, you know, the Amiga 1000, what came first, the grandstand machines or Pong or what? I wanted a history timeline which would have been quite boring if anybody else had narrated it. You can imagine this on the BBC. We get as far as 1978 and it would be 1978. 1978. You know, these things have to be delivered with some kind of panache or some kind of integrity which kind of sends these things up. Because when we're talking about machines with 16K, 48 kilobytes of memory, 16 colours, 8 colours, the Apple was monochrome for years. So you really have to highlight the fact that it's ludicrous, but at the same time, again, don't take the mickey, treat these things with reverence because it is history, and this has been designed for history students of the computer and video game era. So we'll be looking at computers and consoles. We won't be saying it came from MITs or it came from anywhere else. It came from a collaboration of Shockley and all kinds of things, all collaborating, and then it just exploded in a few years. But names, huge names in the video games industry, I won't really be mentioning those except for passing, because I want to get to the blocks of what happened, when, why, and what happened as a result of that. And so it won't be a dry, senseless, humorless exploration into the voyages of the past, but it will be kind of more than a glorified slideshow. If there are court files, I'll present those. If there are images of things which are going on in the press, I'll try and show those. And unlike many clips and shows, I want you to read the clips and the captions on offer. So, for example, there may be a clip on the Amiga use clip. You'll see, you know, Commodore buys Amiga in one scene, and all you'll get is Commodore buys Amiga, and it'll be like that, and then you'll see it, and then that's it. Or on some other famous YouTubers, they might have Commodore buys Amiga, and they'll have it like that, and then they'll pan it straight across, so you can only just read it, or like that, and you can't really read it. So on mine, I want it to be full frame, and then panning in just slowly on the important bit, and then you can read it and take that into your own context, because this thing will not have an interpretation of the narration. It will just have facts. This happened, this was the result. This had this, that had that, it builds upon this, it went there. And then we'll move on to the next thing. Let's have a look inside it, let's have a look who designed it, let's see how they did it. Let's have a look at the blueprints, and we will explain what is an IC, what is all the chips, the PGAs, the dips, the SIPs, the SIMs. We'll find out what all that is all about, but we'll save what the Amiga is all about until the next film, which I hope to release next year after another Kickstarter. This film is just up to the launch of the Amiga, the Lincoln Center, and up to December 1985 with the marketing by Commodore of the Amiga 1000 and the end of the Amiga team's involvement with it. And we will be mentioning a few names in passing: R.J. Markle, Dave Needle, Dave Morse, Bob Burns, Glenn Caller, Andy Finkel. We'll name them all, but they won't be the stars of the show like other Amiga shows that you've seen. We'll be seeing the history of Jay Miner, and we'll be mentioning how all these guys, Carl Sassenrath, they got involved with the Amiga, and we'll be seeing things like that. But obviously there are no images of Carl Sassenrath's Chaos, because Chaos was just some numbers on a screen, and well, that was handed over and that became Tripos, and then they expanded on the commands, they built some libraries, and that became Amiga-DOS. So, well, we'll be looking at that, but it's very hard to find images of those, so we'll be trying to find as best as I can. And yes, if I have to fall back on commercial imagery and videos, well, they'll be in there. And the cameos of everybody on the Amiga scene is in there, as well as the Commodore scene. Bill Hurd's in there, Dave Haynes in there. Again, unlike many films that you've seen, I didn't want this to be flashy and a show-off presentation, because we are talking, after all, about the 1970s and 1980s, when you didn't really get much flashy showing-off presentation. So I thought about creating crossfades and fancy transitions and everything that you've seen before, but those really didn't come out until the Video Toaster, which came out after the Amiga 2000 in 1987. So we really won't get to see those in this movie. I wanted this to be simple, using cuts. Clean cuts, you know. Clean, plain cuts. So, if that's at all possible. Getting back to the fact that that's how they used to do it back in the day. And I could have done all kinds of things. Woo, fancy, all this pop-up and all this arrows pointing to this and that, speech bubbles, whoop, and all the rest of it. I usually do, but I didn't want to do that because that would have distracted people, that would have taken people out of the time warp. Because I don't want to see the history of TRS-80 and suddenly somebody cuts to a scene from a movie of somebody getting impaled and there's blood and guts spurting out all over the place, and then it turns to some action, and then it turns into some drama where somebody else is getting killed and they find a horse's head in the microwave. You know, what has that got to do with the TRS-80? Well, for the same reason, I won't be showing things like that, and cutaways and things which don't really matter. I won't be in there, who cares about me? It will be focused on the machines from different angles, from, you know, maybe the games, maybe the software, maybe the operating systems, and we will be looking at how DOS was created, mentioning that, and we'll be recapping the fourth and final film of this section. We'll be catching up on Apple and IBM, DOS, Amiga, and the ST, and we'll be racking everything up and bringing everything up to speed, so that by the time we get to the launch of the Amiga, you're up there with all the happenings, and we've moved from the 4-bit, maybe the 2-bit era, all the way up to the 16-bit era, from 1970 all the way up to 1985. So it's all done, narrated. I just have to find the hard images and to stick those in there and to try and find it. And unfortunately, when I narrated it, I narrated it with the microphone a little bit closer than I usually do when I'm narrating these games. So you can hear the P's propping, you can hear that kind of thing, and echoes, and I wasn't really happy about that after narrating hours of this video. I have tried to go back and edit that so that it's not as live. You know, it was quite upsetting to hear that yes it's fine, but going back to it I find that the audio is a bit out. So I have narrated some bits and tried to make it as good as I can, because this is, for me, this is the thing that I've always wanted to do. I've always been interested in the history of computers. I've wanted to know the chicken and the egg. I want to know what came first and the people involved. So I'm going to do the best I can of this because I wanted to do that. And there are a few computer images in there. I use Scala to create some boxes pop up with the info and things on the bottom, the price, and the Scala things pop up, and then I use fancy Scala transition to get rid of those and things like that. But those are the only fancy things that you'll see in the entire documentary. Basically I wanted it to look like the Computer Chronicles, Stuart and Gary, you know, the old Computer Chronicles things, and yeah, that will be in there. Again, I haven't asked for the permission. It probably costs $1,000 a second to license that show, but it is in there. But I have kind of, you know, fattled around with it so that it's not absolute abuse of copyright. It's just in there for a few seconds to highlight just the one point in the whole of the 4 hours. So I'll be looking at how magazines got started and the Computer Chronicles and the shows, the Bytes, the Hoys, in the next movie when we start talking about the multimedia of the Amiga. In this, we're not really looking at the magazines, but I will be using, I've found and downloaded and used as many captions as I can from magazines to fill you in on that time. As much as possible, there are quite a few secrets in here, but it would be impossible to go through everything and say this is everything. It would be 10 hours, you know. There are machines that I'm only mentioning in passing, like the Atari 5200 and 7800 and all these revisions, the Atari 1200, all these micro divisions, the C128D, we'll be mentioning those. They're in there, but I won't go to town mentioning every single console ever created because there wouldn't be much point. I say, right, this is this, these were on the market, and revisions of those and clones of those. So we don't really need to know about how many IBM PC clones there were on the market. I mentioned the PC, I mentioned the Compaq, and that's it. So this will be focusing on the Amiga, of course, when that starts up. But I like to think of this first part of the series as the first three lives of Atari, because Atari's first life was under Nolan Bushnell. He jumped up, did the platform game, and he got axed and he fell into the spikes. Atari's second life was under Warner Communications, and Warner's tried to climb up the ladder to the top and to get the golden talisman, but unfortunately they fell into the water, died, and they actually gave it away. Not sold it for $250 million, they actually gave it away to Jack Tramiel. And the story goes that it was worth $150 million, then $140 million, and basically he said, well, I'll pay you off in IOUs, and none of the IOUs ever got given back to Warner Communications, so Jack got Atari for free. But Warners were losing millions a day, so it was actually cheaper to give it away to Jack than to keep Atari and be losing millions a day. So they actually saved $200 million in the first year by not having Atari on the books. And then the third life of Atari, the ST, pops up under Jack Tramiel. And, well, that carries on for a while. That's its third life, and it's cruising along there. And it's trying to have a racing game with the Amiga. Who's going to win? Well, up until 1990, 1991, we didn't have a clue who was going to win. And in fact, Atari, as we'll find out in the next movie that I'm going to make, Atari was actually the leader in some points. of the Amiga. So that's the film that cannot be made that I'm going to be making next, hopefully. But let's talk about this one, and pronunciations. Of course, it's difficult how to pronounce everything. And the one pronunciation I will draw your attention to is Ira Valesky, because Ira Valesky is known as Ira Valinsky. And I call him Ira Valesky. He's the guy that did the TED case designs and all the TED machines, the Commodore Plus 4, the Commodore, well, the 16 wasn't that guy, but he did this RST computer case design as well. And Bill Hurd calls him Ira Valesky in every single documentary he's in. So that's his pet name for Ira Valinsky, but I thought, well, maybe that is his name after all. And so I called him that all the way through this documentary. And so it's Ira Valinsky, but I'm pronouncing it Valesky because maybe that's what he was called to his friends, and maybe that's it. Maybe it was just a Bill Hurd thing and I've got it wrong. But for the most part, I try to investigate how to pronounce names. Some of those are a lot easier to pronounce and find out than others, and sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it isn't. Ken Nussbacher, that's how I pronounce it. And so I'm not perfect, but as long as you get to know what's going on, there will be subtitles in the film in full English. I'll put the script in there, and YouTube will slap that together with the voices in audio sync, and then hopefully we'll have an audio sync script to the movie, and several people have been in touch saying they'll help me translate that into different languages, which is fantastic. So hopefully if you can see the numbers and the names on the screen, then you can hopefully understand my pronouncing of the English. And of course I could pronounce it in my native Lancashire, but I don't think many people will be able to understand what I'm talking about. So I'd rather not bother doing that. I'd rather just try to speak more clearly, and even if that means coming up with this false kind of high and low pitched presentation method, which I've adopted after years of producing the video game guides and the review videos for Lemon Amiga. So we'll continue to do that, and we'll continue to have a look at that after this film gets released, and we'll continue to review some amazing Amiga games, stuff that you may not have even heard of, even some two-player action, which is fantastic as far as I'm concerned. So that's all going to be happening. So there are going to be a few secrets in this which I'll reveal, and once you know those secrets, that'll be common knowledge, that's fine, but hopefully I'll kind of explode those onto the scene, and then once we all get to know those, then that's fine. So there are a few things which maybe you didn't know, certainly I didn't know until I investigated all this research, which has taken the last 16 months, and it will probably take the next couple of months to finish the thing off. So it's taken a long time to research, but hopefully the next part will be easier because the magazines will be out and information will be on the table, and it'll be a lot easier to find things, hopefully, and we'll see. For this part, I'm hoping that you don't think it's going to be a wazzle-dazzle documentary, or it's going to be a boring History Channel snooze fest. I'm hoping that you'll just get the point of this, and we'll see J Minor coming up and you'll think, oh, now he did this and now he did that, now he did this but now he did that. Look at Joe the Cure as well. They'll work together, and then you'll see it all building up. Before those, you'll see those are the fathers of the modern computing industry, and you also see the grandfathers of the modern computing industry. All mention all the names in passing, from Ampets to MIPS to, you know, the Altair, all the systems that popped up, which were basic glorified calculators, and then we'll go through the grandfathers to the fathers, and then maybe even the sons of the video games industry will pop up. That's the final film, and the sons are the people that you know already, the John Romeros of this world, the John Hares of the sons spawned from all that generation, and the great guys which make technical machines these days, which, well, we really don't get celebrity designers anymore, you know. when the new Intel chip comes out, or the chipset comes out, or the new Apple comes out, there really isn't a guy stood there saying, I designed this, I did the graphics, I did the printers, I did the typeface, I did this, the serial, the modem, the interface, the GUI. You know, those celebrity guys aren't on the scene anymore. And so we really have only got up to the 90s to feature those celebs, and we'll work through it, and maybe in a little more detail than the Drisk documentaries, which I'm a big fan of. But again, it would be impossible to cover everything. And you may think I'm doing this to cover the ultimate angle on the Amiga. Well, I'm not. I really want guys to fill in the cracks and the gaps left by this documentary. And by that I mean machines being invented, like the Vectrex. I might mention the Vectrex for 4 minutes, but you could do a whole documentary on that. The MSX, I mentioned that for 5 minutes. Microsoft MSX, you could do 2 hours on the MSX and dig into that and find out all about that, the MSX2 and all the rest of it. So I'm hoping that guys, gals and producers and documentary makers will do that. Will think, oh, that sounds like an interesting story, let's just dig into this a little bit more and let's find out actually the truth about how many, you know, Atari chips that Apple stole from Atari to make the original Apple. How many things did they actually get away with? Well, I have no idea. I can only dig so far, and there's only so much time I can go into with these. So I summarise an entire book's worth of things into one paragraph. And yes, I have read the books, the magazines, I've watched hours and hours of footage, I've looked at the history of Apple, Commodore, Atari, PCs, you know, you name it, the history of every little microcomputer with all the adverts that went with it, the Sinclair QL and the old computers that you've never even heard of. All the Commodore machines, for example, the Texas Instruments machines, all the little forerunners to the modern video games industry. And there's simply not enough time to cover all those, so I've done the best I can. My battery running out. So, once again, I'll be putting some behind the scenes video on the YouTube before I release, but thanks once again. This is a Play Expo non-video special to explain what we're up to at the moment, and I hope to see you guys at some point, sometime soon. Thank you.